Relax, because I'm going to explain why you need to stop freaking out about Kyle Pitts and Kirk Cousins.
You are Locked On Falcons, your daily Atlanta Falcons podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back, everyone, to another illustrious episode of the Locked On Falcons podcast, your daily Atlanta Falcons podcast, part of Locked On Sports Atlanta, your team every day. And today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Place your first $5 bet, and you'll get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. So if you don't know me, I'm your very humble host, Aaron Freeman, a.k.a. Sirius Black, a.k.a. the iron that sharpens the iron, a.k.a. Mr. a.k.a. And I've been covering the Atlanta Falcons for far too long, formerly at FalcFans.com, RIP. Still going strong on this illustrious podcast, and I thank each and every one of you that goes strong with me as everydayers. That means you make it your first listen each and every day. And to become an everydayer, all you have to do is subscribe or follow for free on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts. So today's episode is our Week 4 All-22 review, where I've reviewed the film, and I want to talk about Troy Andersen and Mike Hughes in a positive way with the Falcons defense, but some concerns in terms of, do the Falcons still need to beef up their run defense, and can we truly trust the progress that the pass rush has made over the last week? But first, we got to talk about Kyle Pitts and Kirk Cousins, because I've seen a lot of criticism directed at these two individuals over the past 48 hours. And while I get where it's coming from, it feels a little bit too much, right? Let's start with Kyle Pitts. He had basically like 4 bad reps against the Saints, and now all of a sudden people are like, get rid of him, trade him, do whatever, he's a bum, all this stuff. And, those 4 bad reps where he didn't make a tight window catch on a slant route. He got beat at the catch point on a slant by Marshawn Lattimore. He tripped on a drag route on the crosser, and then he basically missed one block on an inside zone run where Chase Young was able to beat him in the second quarter. And then if you watch Kyle Pitts the rest of the game, he was fine. He did what you expect him to do. His blocking continues to be solid, again, relatively speaking. No one's going to mistake Kyle Pitts for an elite blocking tight end, but he hits most of his assignments, right? He's not really asked to make those blocks at the point of attack, but he's holding those backside blocks, helping create some of those cutback lanes, and doing a pretty good job at that thing. A lot of criticism about the lazy route running that he had. Yeah, on that one play where Lattimore broke it up, yeah, he needs to do a little bit better on that situation. But as I've described many times in the past, and I've said this to many people recently, to me, the problem is less about Kyle Pitts and his urgency on one route. It's more about his overall usage within the offense, and he's being used basically like Tyler Higbee gets used in the Rams offense, which isn't a huge part of the Rams passing attack over the years, except for when you get into the red zone. And then you're probably saying, well, he's not doing anything in the red zone. Well, the Falcons aren't doing anything in the red zone, not Kyle Pitts specifically, right? They need to do a better job reaching the red zone. And part of the reason why they're not reaching the red zone as much as we would like them to reach it is because they're not explosive enough, right? Based off of what I've seen, on 56% chance of reaching the red zone on a drive that includes an explosive play, a 20-plus yard play. That's about what the average has been since I've been tracking this data with the Falcons since 2010, 56%. But unfortunately, only about 25% of the Falcons' drives so far include an explosive play this year, and that's below the number that we saw over the 3 years that Arthur Smith was the play caller, where no one would describe that Falcons offense as an explosive offense, and about 27% of their drives resulted in explosive play, not counting kneel downs and stuff like that. But we're only 4 games into the season, so there's still plenty of room for that number to improve as the season wears on. But, to me, one of the ways that the Falcons can do that is finding more opportunities for Kyle Pitts to be one of those explosive playmakers. We saw that big 50-yard catch on the corner route against Kansas City. There was another corner route that was intercepted that was attempted to Kyle Pitts on the corner route. They dialed up one of these corner routes against the Saints. Cousins looked elsewhere. He almost threw an interception, trying to force it into Drake London on that particular play. And so before we talk about Kirk Cousins, overall, I just think there's been an overreaction to a handful of bad reps from Kyle Pitts in this one game in all. And, I think people tend to focus on the 2 or 3 bad reps that they see live on Sunday, and then you go back, or at least I go back and watch the film, and then you're like, yeah, okay, it's 2-3 bad reps, no big deal, right? And so to me, it's less a Kyle Pitts issue, it's more an offense issue. It's more this offense isn't really featuring him in the ways that we want to be. And, that's not meant to knock Zac Robinson and say, oh, his play calling, his offense is bad or anything like that. But to me, if we can figure this thing out and make Kyle Pitts a bigger part of the offense, especially if that bigger part results in more explosive plays, it's going to do not only wonders for Kyle Pitts as an individual, but it's going to do wonders for this offense moving forward. They haven't quite figured it out 4 games into the season, but we still have lots of football left to be played. Now moving on to Kirk Cousins. I think a lot of the criticism I've heard about Kirk Cousins, I feel like is people being I'm not going to say overreacting, but really focusing on some questionable late game decision making from Kirk Cousins. And outside of that, Kirk Cousins is fine, right? But you had that late drive, that the game winning drive that resulted in Younghoe Koo's 58-yard field goal, and you got the DPI on that drive from Darnell Mooney, and then Kirk got a little greedy, right? The Falcons needed to only get 5 or 10 yards to give Younghoe Koo a much more makeable field goal at that point in time, and Kirk was pushing the ball down the field unnecessarily. And I think it's fair to criticize him for that. Now, I'm going to forgive the 1st and 10 throw to Drake London. He threw a corner to Drake London, so he threw it upfield, and Drake London kind of flattened his route a little bit. So that to me is more of a miscommunication. And with 23 seconds left in the game, it's a 1st and 10. So theoretically, you have 3 plays to try to move the ball closer. I'm more forgiving of that particular play, especially taking a shot there, and because it's a miscommunication. The second down and then subsequently the third down plays get less forgivable as we go across. The second down play, they threw a go ball to Darnell Mooney. Mooney didn't finish his route, something we've seen a couple of times with Darnell Mooney on those deep throws, but it wasn't a great throw on that particular play. And then the third down play to me was the worst of them all, the least forgivable of them, where he threw to Darnell Mooney on a corner route that he wasn't open on at all. And Paulson Adebo was in Mooney's hip pocket, and the Falcons got lucky that Adebo didn't come down with that interception rather than just breaking it up. And so, I get why people are critical of Kirk. I do feel like, that one play could have given the game away. Don't get me wrong. I don't want to dismiss that, that if that winds up being an interception, the game's over and the Falcons lose, all because Kirk wouldn't check the ball down. So we'd be probably having a very different conversation if that play goes differently. But overall, again, I'm not going to sit here and be like Kirk has been terrible. Right? I've had a lot of conversations with Falcon fans over the last couple of days, expressing their disappointment in Kirk Cousins and how he has started the season. From my perspective, I think that's a lot of people are disappointed because they had overly high expectations because they were drinking the Kool-Aid over the summer and buying all the hype about how this team was going to, be great this year and all that stuff, and be an elite team and be a Super Bowl contender and all that stuff. And it was like, they're just a borderline playoff team. And that's kind of what they have been so far through 4 weeks, if that, right? We're working towards that, being a borderline playoff team. If you ask me, we're still not quite there yet. But, I think everybody bought into the hype that Kirk was going to be this sort of savior because of all the Falcons are just a quarterback away narrative that was so pervasive this offseason that you heard me push back against. And to me, the reason I push back against is not because I'm a hater, but just because that didn't mesh with reality with Kirk Cousins in the past, right? Kirk has been to the playoffs 3 times in 9 years as a starter. So there's no automatic, hey, you get Kirk Cousins, you're a playoff team, and you look at the Vikings situation where when they first got Kirk Cousins back in 2018, right? They had been in the NFC Championship game. They were like, we're a Super Bowl team. We're going to get Kirk Cousins. He's going to push us over the hump. And then they were basically barely above 500. They were one game, I think, above 500 over the next 4 seasons. And those first 4 years were Kirk in Minnesota. So it's like Kirk is not that guy. We got Kirk, and that's what we were talking about back in February, for stability, not because Kirk automatically was going to make this team into a great team. And so that's where I think the expectations were off, because people were like, well, we paid him all this money and all this stuff, and he's going to instantly make us a contender. And it's like, no, he's going to stabilize the quarterback position that has been very unstable for the last couple of years. The Falcons paid a premium for that, whether you think that was a right decision or not. It is what it is. And then it's really, to me, the bet that the Falcons were really making was not, hey, Kirk Cousins is going to make us into a playoff team. The bet that they were really making, and I said this many times throughout the offseason, was that they were making a bet on Zac Robinson, that he was going to not only get the best out of Kirk Cousins over these next couple of years as he stabilizes the quarterback situation, but he's also, Zac Robinson, that is going to elevate the pieces that he's inheriting, Bijan Robinson, Drake London, Kyle Pitts, and turn those guys into the premier players that so many people think they are capable of being. And so far this year, we haven't really seen that come to fruition. We've gotten flashes of that, but we just haven't seen that come to fruition. And again, this is not me saying Zac Robinson's the problem and he's to blame for all the Falcons. No, it's not. But to me, from a disappointment standpoint, for my money, I'm much more disappointed in Zac Robinson and his performance so far through 4 games than I am in Kirk Cousins or Kyle Pitts. Those guys, to me, have been what I expected them to be, or what I think the offense allows them to be at this point in time. And with Zac Robinson, again, and we can take the blame for this one for having to, buying the hype on Zac Robinson. But, I think a lot of us, myself included, were hoping, expecting, wanting to see him be the next Ben Johnson, be the next Kevin O'Connell. And instead we're getting a guy from a play calling standpoint that in my eyes is marginally better than Arthur Smith or Dirk Cutter or Steve Sarkisian. Not bad play callers, not terrible guys, but not guys that are necessarily going to do a lot of the heavy lifting for this team to reach their goals, which is making the playoffs, right? When you look at the 10 years that Arthur Smith, Dirk Cutter, and Steve Sarkisian called plays in Atlanta over the last, decade plus, Falcons made the playoffs twice in those 10 years, right? So it's like, basically that's what I'm getting at, where it's just like that level of play calling is not going to allow you to consistently achieve your goals of being a contender in January and whatnot. And so I say all that not to say, hey, the sky is falling, we're doomed. There's still a lot of football left to be played. Zac is still learning on the job. That's true for Zac Robinson. That's true for Kyle Pitts and Kirk Cousins. And hopefully we'll be sitting back in a couple of months laughing. We're getting ready to watch the Falcons play a January football game, laughing and saying, hey, man, you remember how we were all worried about Zac Robinson and all those things that we were worried about in September, and they just kind of went away over time. That's the hope that we're going to have. We'll see if the Falcons can, allow us to achieve those dreams and whatnot. But we're going to be here every week, every day here on Locked On Falcons talking about it between now and then. So we'll see what progress they make in the coming days, weeks, and months, and hopefully years. So we'll see on that front. But let's talk a little bit more positively, right? Something that legitimately is worth getting excited about, and that's going to be Troy Andersen and Mike Hughes, and we'll do that as we continue today's Locked On Falcons. PrizePicks is America's #1 daily fantasy sports app with over 5 million active members because it's the easiest and most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports. And unlike other apps on PrizePicks, it's just you versus the numbers. All you got to do is pick more or less on up to 6 players' stat projections, and you can watch the winnings roll in. And if you're looking to get in on the action because certain sports books aren't available in your state, don't worry, PrizePicks is. And the withdrawals are fast, safe, and secure. You can get your money in as quickly as 15 minutes. And so why not ride out Tyler Algier and more or less on his projections? Or maybe you're feeling down on Kyle Pitts and you want to go less, or maybe you're feeling good about it more. Whatever you want, check it out by downloading the PrizePicks app today and use code LOCKEDONNFL, and you'll get $50 instantly when you play $5. That's code LOCKEDONNFL. To get $50 instantly when you play $5. You don't even need to win to receive that $50 bonus. It's guaranteed. PrizePicks, run your game. So, as you guys know, it's a celebration. Troy Andersen played well against the Saints. And, I was wondering, once I dived into the film, would it back up? Sometimes you watch the game live on Sunday, you're like, this guy played pretty good. And then you watch the film and it's like, it wasn't as good as I thought. But the film did back up Troy Andersen's solid performance. He did get off to a little bit of a slow start, had a couple of missed tackles on that opening series, but I think made up for it as a difference maker in the run game as well as in coverage the rest of the game. I counted 4 run stops, 2 coverage stops. For me, a stop is a defensive success. My definition, I think, is a little bit stricter than what PFF and Next Gen Stats use for their definition of a stop. So, to me, it's a little bit higher quality. So when you get that many stops in the game, which is relatively rare, that's a really good number. But, stops to me are much more impactful than looking at tackle stats because, stops are basically qualitative measures of tackles as opposed to, what some people do and jump on piles and they'll rack up a bunch of tackles that way, but none of them are quality tackles and whatnot. So had 5 targets on Troy Andersen, 40% success rate. Of course, had the pick 6 in this game. That 40% success rate is a really good number for a linebacker. Last year, Troy Andersen, obviously in a limited sample size, had a 38% success rate on targets. Caden Ellis was 49% last year. Nate Landman was 52% last year. So 40% is a good number for a linebacker and continues to show Troy Andersen's value in coverage, which we've talked a lot about over the years. And, obviously now with him being hurt, we'll have to sort of wait and see, how long we have to wait and see. We'll have to find out, probably at least a week, if not more, if he can build off of this game, if this is going to be a trend for types of performance that we can expect regularly out of Troy Andersen, or are we going to look back, weeks and months from now and being like, oh, you remember that one really good game Troy Andersen had against the Saints, and it never really kind of happened again, and it was an outlier or something like that. So, but this one really good game, just sort of backs up what you've been hearing all along. I feel vindicated for all my Troy Andersen, hype train that I've been pushing for the last couple of months and talking about, his potential value and impact, because like we talk about it with the matchup with Alvin Kamara. I've mentioned this a number of times on the podcast and others over the last couple of days. He did not shut down Alvin Kamara. Nobody shut down Alvin Kamara in this game, but a lot of the Falcons' success containing Alvin Kamara in this game was due to Troy Andersen having that speed, that sideline to sideline range and ability. That athleticism, that coverage ability is an asset that I've been pushing, on this podcast for the last few months and years. And so later in the season, assuming Troy Andersen's back healthy, when we face guys like an Aaron Jones, when we face a guy like an Austin Eckler, having a player like Troy Andersen is going to be a huge factor in keeping those guys in check in the future. And so we'll see if he lives up to those expectations. But let's talk about Mike Hughes for a bit, who also deserves, some positive. We haven't spent as much time talking about Mike Hughes. And again, I'll take another victory lap, because I told you guys back in like early June or whatever, when people were like, who's going to start at outside corner opposite AJ Terrell? I was like, Mike Hughes is going to be the starter week one. The question is whether or not Mike Hughes is going to play well enough to maintain that spot through week 18. And that was sort of me a toss up. But so far through 4 games, I think Mike Hughes is playing far beyond most people's expectations and living up to the expectations that I thought. The main reason why I thought Mike Hughes would wind up being the starter, and I think it was on display in the Saints game, was his ability in run support and why he would be a starter over someone like Clark Phillips, right? Mike Hughes is not a lockdown coverage guy. I had 5 targets against him, 4 catches allowed, only for 25 yards, a success rate of 80%, which is not a good number, but he was able to limit those gains in the way that the Falcons want to play on defense, right? He's able to come up and tackle this. The Saints tested him very early in this game. He was lined up in off coverage. They would throw those smoke routes, which is when the quarterback will see a cornerback in off coverage. A quarterback will see a cornerback. Hopefully you guys caught that in off coverage. And basically he'll take a 1-step drop and just throw it out there and let his guy, Rashid Shaheed, Chris Olave, try to make that guy miss and get a big gain. And they tried that a couple of times early in the game. Mike Hughes consistently was able to come up and make that tackle, and they stopped doing it after that point because they're like, okay, we're not going to test that guy anymore and do that. And you saw them do something similar against Clark Phillips later in the game when he stepped in to the game to step in for AJ Terrell, right? Where there was a series, I think in the second half, where AJ Terrell got knocked out of the game. Clark Phillips came in. They threw a quick hitch to Chris Olave. Clark Phillips drove down on the football, couldn't make the tackle, right? And Olave was able to turn what should have been only a 5-yard gain into a 9-yard gain. And that gets back to what I was saying. Like, again, this is not meant to bash Clark Phillips or anything like that, but like that was the reason, based off of how this defense wants to play with all the zone coverage that they play. And I charted 89% of their defensive snaps were zone coverage in this game. So overall, this season, it's been about 83% of their defensive snaps have been zone coverage. That the goal of zone coverage is not really to prevent completions. The goal of zone coverage is to prevent explosive plays, right? It's all part of the Falcons' bend but don't break style of defense and their philosophy, which is like, we'll concede you a couple of yards on the early downs, but if we have corners that can run and tackle, like we're fine doing that. And Mike Hughes is capable of doing that, while Clark Phillips is not quite. And again, it's not meant to bash Clark Phillips. I think he's done a good job in his limited opportunities, but most of the issues I've seen in those limited opportunities, the negatives with Clark Phillips, have all been in run support. That is always, to me, the big question with Clark Phillips, not necessarily being able to do the coverage stuff in a zone scheme like the Falcons are playing. He's excellent in that regard, but the run support issues have reared their ugly head a couple of times where it's like he's a little late reacting to the run. He's not necessarily making a tackle. And that not only limits his potential as an outside corner in this scheme, but it also limits his potential to kick inside as a nickel, because as you guys well know, when you play in the nickel, you're often a factor in the run support because, you're replacing a linebacker. And we know that teams, and teams in the past, the Chiefs and the Eagles, have definitely enjoyed running against the Falcons nickel defense, and you need guys that can be factors in run support, and that's, again, an area that Clark Phillips needs to get better at if he's going to carve out a regular role in this Falcons defense where he's behind a guy like Mike Hughes and AJ Terrell. And D. Alford has not been great in run support this year, but he has generally been more reliable than Clark Phillips has shown to date. So we'll see if Clark can continue to make strides. And if he does, then we can really have a conversation in earnest about, hey, that coverage potential that he may bring a little bit more than Mike Hughes, in addition to you're not losing a whole lot in the run support. So that we'll see if that is the case. But, we'll get into a conversation about the Falcons' run defense overall, right? Their pressure and, how big a loss is losing Zion Logue to the Buffalo Bills. And we'll do that to wrap up today's Locked On Falcons. So NFL fans, make sure you start your season with a big return on FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. And so when you get that hunch in the middle of the game, you can go to the same page that you place your bets, as well as to check the latest stats and view the live play-by-play. And when you do, you'll get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet over at FanDuel. Whether you want to bet on this upcoming Falcons-Bucks Thursday night line, you want to bet on Georgia to win the national title, or you want to bet on other things for Thursday night, right? Kyle Pitts scoring a touchdown, plus 270. Tyler Algier, plus 230 to score a touchdown. You put them together, same game parlay, right? You bet $5, you can win up to $55, right? So, a lot of things to go check out over at FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. So we've spent a lot of time over the last 2 weeks talking about the Falcons' struggles against the run, and mostly we've been blaming it on teams running against the Falcons' soft nickel defense due to having less players in the box. Often you're only getting 6 or 7 guys defending the run in the box. If you're the Falcons and you're going up against 6 or 7 guys that are blocking, and then the running back is either the 7th or 8th guy that you have to account for in the run game, and if you can get a hat on the hat, there's nobody really to take out the running back until he gets a 5 to 10 yards down the field, and then a safety has to make a tackle or whatever. And the Saints didn't really do this in this game, right? They had their fullbacks, they had their extra tight ends out on the field, so the Falcons could stay in their base defense about 60% of the time in this game. And I think that benefited their run defense quite a bit, especially in the second half of the game, where they did shut down the Saints run game. I'm sorry. I think the Saints only ran the ball like 4 times out of their 11 personnel. So the Falcons didn't have to worry about their nickel defense getting bashed. Now, last week we complained about the Falcons when they did try to defend the run in their nickel, playing their penny front, which is their 5-1 front, and putting undersized edge rushers on the inside, playing a 3-tech or a 4-eye, and those guys getting pushed around. And that was a contributing factor to why Kansas City had so much success and other teams have had so much success running against them. The Falcons didn't really do that as much in this game when they did run their penny front. So once again, indicating that someone in that building in Flowery Branch is an everydayer of this podcast. But the Saints still have some success running the football. And I think it's still somewhat owed to being a little too light up front. And mostly that's due to Kentavious Street being asked to play nose tackle, right? That when the Falcons would play with their 3 down linemen, they did actually use 3 D linemen instead of 2 D linemen and an edge rusher. But, they would often have Eddie Goldman playing the nose, and he was alongside the other starters with Grady Jarrett and David Onyemata. And then when they would flip their backups in to rotate those guys, Zach Harrison and Taquan Graham playing the defensive end spot, it was Kentavious Street playing the nose tackle spot. And that's just not a good fit for Kentavious Street, right? If you recall during the summer, I was skeptical of Kentavious Street making the roster because I was like, I don't know if he's a good scheme fit in the 3-4 because he spent his entire career playing in the 4-3. He's much more of that disruptive, penetrating type of player. And this defense is more really asking guys to hold the point of attack, and especially at that nose tackle position. And there were a couple of reps in this game where he was lined up as a 1 technique nose tackle, offset that center's outside shoulder. And he was able to get upfield, be that disruptive presence, whether it was as a pass rusher or a run defender. But every other time when he was asked to sort of take on double teams, like that's not the answer. That's, he's not going to be the solution to that problem. And that problem probably isn't going to go away anytime soon, since one of the Falcons' true backup nose tackles on the practice squad, Zion Logue, just got poached by the Buffalo Bills. And a lot of people asked me today on the Locked On Falcons Insiders, like, is he gone permanently? we'll see, right? He's an official member of the Buffalo Bills, so the chances of the Falcons getting him back is depending on the Bills letting him go, right? This happened with Brian Hill, the running back, the former Falcons running back in 2017, where he was on the practice squad. The Bengals picked him up off the practice squad. He finished that season with the Bengals. Then he was cut the following summer in training camp. The Falcons scooped him back up, and then he played 2018, 2019, and 2020 with the Falcons at that point in time. So, there's a chance that maybe, the Bills will move on from Zion Logue at some point in the coming weeks, months, or years, and the Falcons might be able to get him back. But for the time being, he is a Buffalo Bill, and we'll just sort of have to see on that front. And much has been made over the last couple of weeks about the Falcons rookies not playing, especially their early round D linemen like Rugeroro and Brandon Dorlus being inactive for 4 games this year. I haven't been that concerned with it because, frankly, I don't care about rookies and I care about winning football games, and rookies don't really help you win football games. That's just my opinion. But, it's a fact, but, still an opinion. I think if you were going to really make an argument that any rookie was deserving of playing on Sundays, the player that probably would benefit this team the most would have been Zion Logue, right? Among these 3 D linemen, because the Falcons don't have a true backup nose tackle behind Eddie Goldman, and Eddie Goldman at his age and, having not played football really much over the last 3-4 years is not really a guy that you want out there playing, 50 plus snaps a game. And so you want to have someone who can spell him. And Zion Logue was a better option to do that role, which has value than Ruger Dorlus, who are just going to play D end and aren't going to really offer you much more than what Zach Harrison or Taquan Graham or even Contavious Street could offer you in that role. And not to mention Zion Logue had, to me, outplayed Ruger and Dorlus in the preseason, just in the vacuum, looked better. But the Falcons still have LaKale London on their practice squad, so they could bring him up to be that backup behind Eddie Goldman. And I know 2 of you guys are sitting here, the people that actually remember the things I say on this podcast. You recall me saying after the draft that, hey, Rook played some snaps at nose tackle in Clemson. Could he be the solution? That, maybe. I don't think Rook is really cut out to be a full-time nose tackle in the NFL. So I don't know if he's adding anything that Street isn't adding, especially given that Rook was struggling to hold up against the point of attack as a 3 tech. And so asking him to take on double teams as a 1 tech, but whoever is listening in Flowery Branch right now, whether it's Raheem, Terry, Zac Robinson, or that Falcons intern, I would suggest for you to swap out LaKale London to play the backup nose tackle instead of Contavious Street. Now, where does that leave Street? Is he inactive? Is he cut? Is he traded? Who knows? But, you have an extra body. You probably have too many bodies at offensive line. You don't need to carry Kevin King on the roster. So, it's up to somebody in that building to decide. Hopefully it's not the intern making that decision. Hopefully it's someone higher than that. But, that's y'all to figure out who LaKale London's roster spot he's going to replace. But I would suggest you find somebody for him to get an opportunity to play on Thursdays and then on Sundays. So I still feel like we got to keep getting bigger up front. Right. We did stop putting 250-pound edge rushers at 3 tech. Now we just need to stop putting 290-pound 3 techs at 1 tech. So we're making progress. Right now, speaking of progress, the Falcons pass rush is also making progress. Noted this to Jarvis Davis yesterday on the podcast, talking about how the Falcons blitz more. My charting had the Falcons blitzing 12 times. You got pressure on 6 of those blitzes. And I had the Falcons rushing 4 or less 22 times, and they were able to get pressure on 9 of those plays. So about a 41% pressure rate, which is, about 2 pressures more than that 35%, pressure threshold that we always talk about as an acceptable rate of pressure. So that is progress for this pass rush. But my worry is a lot of that was due to the issues that the Saints have up front, where they have 2 backups starting and arguably 2 replacement level starters in Lucas Patrick and Trevor Penning. So, you only got 2 pressures above expectations, or really like 1.5 pressures above expectations against like 4 replacement level players on the, that doesn't fill me with a ton of confidence. So, the Bucs do have some injuries up front, but I am a little bit nervous that pass rush is going to come back down to earth this Thursday night. So we'll see. We need to get pressure on Baker Mayfield. That's something that Jarvis Davis pointed out on yesterday's podcast. I agree 100% with him. The blitz was effective against New Orleans. When the Falcons did blitz on those 12 plays, the Saints only had a success rate of 33% on those plays. So to that intern that is listening to me, tell your bosses, especially Jimmy Lake, do not be afraid to dial up pressure this Thursday night, because it seems to work. And just rushing 4 might not work. So keep that in mind, So that is it for us here on today's All-22 review for the Locked On Falcons insiders. Tomorrow, I will be giving those guys a extended All-22 review where they'll be able to get film of Kyle Pitts, of Kirk Cousins, of Troy Andersen, of Mike Hughes, of Kentavious Street, and Eddie Goldman and those guys doing their thing as well. So all of that is in store. All you got to become an insider is hit that link in the description below at joinsubtext.com/LockedOnFalcons, and you can get a 14-day free trial if you sign up today. So you can get this extended All-22 review, next week's extended All-22 review against the Bucs, and then probably potentially one. I don't know. I can't do math. But 14-day free trial, then $4.99 a month after that point. So sign up if you haven't already. A lot of positive feedback from the current insiders when it comes to those sorts of things. So, if you're a visual learner and you're just, don't want to just listen to the podcast, you want to see what I'm talking about, becoming an insider is the thing to do. So hit that link in the description below. So guys, that's going to do it for us here. We'll be back tomorrow with a crossover Thursday with James Yarko of Locked On Bucs to give you one more preview of this Bucs game. And then, of course, we'll be doing our rapid reaction for the Friday show. So continue to make Locked On Falcons your first listen. It's all part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every